everyone. Ariel Adams here with Superlative Podcast. Please listen to aBlogtoWatch's other podcast, aBlogtoWatch Weekly, where we talk about the latest watch news and reviews. Today on Superlative, I'm very proud to have a guest who I've known of for most of my life, and now I know him personally, which is cool. Fred Savage, founder of Timepiece Grading Specialists. Fred, welcome.
Ariel, it's a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I love the show. Again, like you, I've been aware of you long before I met you, and I'm thrilled to call you a friend, and I'm thrilled to be a guest. This is a pleasure for me. Thank you.
So this experience reminds me of something which I've had multiple times over my sort of life as a hobbyist, and that is identifying that someone else in the world who is good at something you admire also shares your hobby, right? Like when you notice that there's someone else out there who's done something cool and they're also like a watch guy, that makes them a little bit better, doesn't it?
100%. And by the way, that's probably my favorite part about the watch world is how it makes bedfellows of just the strangest people. You know, I'm in New York right now with my daughter, and we were walking around, and you know, there's certain signifiers, or someone's wearing a certain watch, and not like a fancy or expensive watch, but someone's wearing a moon swatch. You're like, oh, that guy knows watches. It's important to them, and you start talking, and it just makes it. It makes you kind of instant friends with such a wide variety of really, really interesting people. And that's honestly my favorite part of being in the world. I love it.
It's an instant connector. I think, you know, on a very basic level, it's kind of like sports, but if you're not into sports, right? It's an ability to take people who don't know each other, but now they have something in common, right?
Yes. And it's nice you mentioned sports, because I think if watch people were into sports, we would have been those guys. But for whatever reason, you know, different interests, lack of athleticism, whatever it is.
Sports is not for everyone. Even if you're athletic, fandom is not for everyone.
True. But no, you're absolutely right. And, it's great. I feel like everyone also in the watch world is kind of like has lived some other life. You know, they're refugees from something. You know, I was a lawyer, I was a doctor, I was an accountant. I had my own company doing, landscaping. You know, I think that everyone comes to watches from something. And they bring with them this whole host of experiences and interests and skill sets, and the common denominator is watches. And I just think it's been so cool. It's exposed me to some of my favorite people, most interesting people, and really, really fast friends. That cuts across everything. It cuts across age, geography, economic strata. Like it cuts across everything, and it makes fast, close friends.
I think that what we're talking about is such an important and emerging topic that isn't really discussed, even though it's a thing, and that is identifying this whole pursuit as a hobby. And ever since I got into this, even though they use words like collectors, right? It wasn't thought of as a hobby. But if you look at it as a hobby, it helps answer a lot of questions, at least I've had. And one of the ones that you brought up is that a lot of professionals, they sort of exit a more stressful world of something that maybe is a topic they don't like. And they use watches as sort of an entrepreneurial hobby, meaning they say, I want to dedicate my business life to a topic that I also enjoy, maybe with people I like to get along with and I have something in common with. So you and many others, whether it's starting a watch brand or a store or a service, for them, it's sort of like not really retirement, but making your life's business also about your hobby. And I think that explains a lot of what's going on a lot of the time. Would you agree?
I would agree with you. I think that, you know, I've been very fortunate in that I was able to, you know, from a very young age, turn kind of a passion into a career. And I know that there are, you know, I know that that's very special, you know, and I feel very lucky about that. And I think a lot of people, you know, they get on a track, whether it's through school or through, you know, family inertia or through necessity, but they get on a track, on a career or a business or a path that they might not be really excited about or passionate about, but they might be really good at it, or they might be really successful at it, or they might just be going through the day. And I think watches, especially in the last, let's say, 10 years, when there's been real tremendous growth and real innovation in approaches to the world, I think people are able to, like you said, go from a profession, a point in their life, and say, okay, this is a real passion of mine. I'd love to see if I can build a career out of a passion. And I've certainly done that. And I try to kind of catch lightning in a bottle twice, because I was fortunate enough to have a career as a passion. But I think there are a lot of people, you're right, see the watch world as an opportunity to really create a second act, a third act, another chapter in their life, and try and build some sort of business, some sort of innovation, some sort of opportunity in a world they feel really passionate about. But I want to go back on something that you said, and I want to get your opinion. Do you feel, because I certainly don't take offense at it, do you think hobby is like a pejorative?
Well, the French certainly think so.
Yeah, I just feel like hobby, when I talk to like my friends who are like watch people, or on the your friends from the WhatsApp groups or the collector sphere, whatever it is, it just feels like hobby. I don't know. Like, I feel like when I was like collecting baseball cards as a teenager, like it was a hobby. But watches feels like, I don't know. But you refer to it as a hobby. Like I don't know. I feel like
I'm reductive, Fred. I'm being super reductive about it. You can romanticize it more.
I'm trying to elevate the conversation here, okay? I'm on superlative, so I'm trying to elevate the conversation.
You're right. You're right. I think that it's just important to sort of boil it down to its simple concept, and then add layers on top of it so that it actually is as prestigious as people feel it is. Because you're right. It's a serious thing. Hobby might sound not serious, but this is serious. But for me, hobby is actually quite serious. My own definition of hobby is as this elated thing that people pour their hearts and minds into. This makes people's lives worth living sometimes. I guess I'm just using it as a term that most people understand when there's an interest that you pour your attention, your passion, your career into. I don't know what else to call that.
No, I mean, I think you're right. And I think I like what you're saying about laying like nuance on top of it. But it's something that every time I try to describe it and I refer to it as a hobby, there's a part of me that says like, I don't know, is that like not, I don't know, but maybe I'm just being a snob. I don't know. I think because when you were saying serious, I do think like there is a seriousness to it, but I also think that some of my favorite parts about the world are that we can have fun and that we can be non-serious about things. And
hobbies are fun.
Hobbies are fun. I just got, and I think they do a great job of, walking the line between, fun and serious, is a brand like Studio Underdog. Like I just got my first one. I got one of the, what do they call it? The, where they mock the people that kind of mock them. The unoriginals. They have the unoriginal line where they made a whole line of watches based off of a company that kind of copied them. And I just love that sense of humor. And so I was like, I want to be a part of that. So I think that it's serious, but there's also like a sense of humor to it, which I like.
Well, look, I'm trying to always draw parallels to other things. And I do recognize that watches as a hobby is relatively new in the scheme of some other hobbies. And you grew up in a context where there was a lot of people who had money to pursue outside interests out of their career. And you probably saw people pouring money in everything from cars, real estate, lavish lifestyles, fashion. Did you see watches as being one of those things, or is it relatively new that was an added on thing that you use for your leisure time and disposable income?
I feel like I didn't really see watches become a serious, people were putting serious money behind them until, probably the last 10 years or so. And I don't know if that was the market. I don't know if that was just my age, because, in my 20s and 30s, people weren't, my friends and colleagues weren't, spending serious money. They were buying their first house. They were maybe starting to buy some art, but watches wasn't a place where people, at least in my world, were putting a lot of serious dollars. And serious dollars meaning let's say 5 figures and up, that wasn't until I got older, in my 40s. And again, I don't know if that's because of where the market was going or just that's where we were in our lives. But no, it was more recent. It was more recent. And until then, watches, people were still buying watches and into watches. I certainly was. And it was very passion driven. It wasn't any less passionate, but the dollars weren't getting into that serious dollar amount. But for me, that's more like life. I think that's more where I am in life.
No, I actually think it's more new to North American culture. When I first started this industry, I started traveling a lot. And I noticed very early on that in Europe, but especially Asia, watch consumption was a so much more mature market. Your average person knew about brands. It was more a thing that young people are into. Growing up in the United States, there was a ton of things that we were told we wanted to buy when we had money, right? There was no shortage. But a nice watch just wasn't one of those things much of the time. It was it was a gadget. It was cool. It was definitely part of culture, but it wasn't have you done well for yourself? Get the gold watch. That was more seen as something that we kind of almost made fun of as opposed to celebrated. Whereas in much of Europe and especially Asia, that was serious. You get that nice watch. How dare you skip that milestone? You know what I mean?
I think you're right. And I think that you make a good point that there's no shortage of kind of totems of success or, signifiers of having, achieved a certain level in the States. But I also feel, and maybe this is just my family, but my dad was a big value guy. My dad was not a big a big big value, didn't spend really lavishly, and he had this pride. And my daughter still has this, but he would say to us, "Fred, you see the alarm clock? You see the alarm clock?" And he had this digital alarm clock by his bed that also had a tape deck, so you could be woken up by an AM/FM radio.
Fancy.
You could be woken up by fancy. I go, "See that radio?" He goes, "I bought that clock radio. I don't know." He's like, "I bought that 30 years ago," and this was 10 years ago. I mean, he bought it in the early 80s. Goes, "Still use it. Never needed another one. That's great. That's all I need." And so I grew up thinking oh, okay, value, buy something that lasts. And by the way, that's a watch. I mean, you could say that about any great watch manufacturer. But my dad was I bought, I don't know, he probably paid $40 for it in 1982, which is insane money for a digital alarm clock. And we still have the alarm clock, wakes up my daughter. So I was always okay, value, get something that really lasts, And so when I started, and don't spend lavishly, this alarm clock was not a totem of my dad's success. I think it was a hallmark for him as to buying, astutely, and getting great value. And so when I first started buying watches, I was okay, I want to get something that's going to last, but I don't want to spend a lot of money. And so when I first started buying watches, I was in college, and I was buying early American 30s watches. I was buying Illinois and Elgin and Waltham and Hamilton. Those are the watches I bought, and I could get them then. And I mean, now they're probably worth about the same. I should have been buying Daytonas, but I could get them for $300 or $400, kind of a really cool stain dial, filigreed case,
beautiful stuff.
Gorgeous stuff, beautiful stuff. Probably still, radium numerals. I'm sure I've shortened my life, by some months with those watches. But they checked those boxes. It could last because these were already then, 80 years old, 70, 80 years old. And they didn't, they worked well. I didn't have to spend a lot of money on them. And so I think, for me, getting into watches, it wasn't like a hallmark of success or some sub-signifier that I had achieved something. It was more, I appreciated the workmanship. I appreciated the design. I appreciated the storytelling behind these watches that had clearly lived a life before me. And I appreciated, I think, the value. So it was my version of that digital alarm clock that my dad had.
I think in the United States, we've prided ourselves, at least historically, on being able to spend lavishly on lots of practical stuff. And we also like to make fun of people who spend lavishly on impractical stuff, though buying watches is arguably an exercise in spending lavishly on impractical stuff. But even within the United States, and you were just at a major event a couple of weeks ago in Chicago where you grew up, the wind-up event, I would still argue that even though we like watches, there's still a predisposition, if you will, to liking practical style watches, or ones that at least have practicality in the story, that mere lavishness, gold, diamonds, etc., often is not enough to get most American enthusiasts excited. Did you observe anything like that, or do you have a different experience?
I think our capacity, and by our, I mean watch enthusiasts, but maybe, just human beings, but certainly watch enthusiasts, our capacity to convince ourselves what is necessary and what is practical is pretty elastic. It's pretty amazing. I mean, once you get into it, you're like, well, of course I need a split second, what if I need to time, what if I'm boiling an egg and, timing my espresso? Like, of course I need a split second chronograph. Obviously, I'm going to need a flying tourbillon because, if I'm on the boat and we get lost and, what's going to happen? I need that. I need that.
I like your justifications.
Yeah, like I absolutely need a deep sea because I'm going to be in the Mariana Trench, maybe, and James Cameron's going to call on him and say, oh, no, I can't go because I'm not going to know the time. So I think our ability to justify—
rationalize.
Yeah, to rationalize what's practical for our watches is pretty unparalleled. And so I think what's practical is very subjective. I think the use cases for which many of my watches were built will never be put to the test.
But those stories are front and center, right? Going back historically, someone wearing a gold Rolex didn't need to have any justification other than it's a gold Rolex. Now we build these elaborate rationalization stories in our minds to justify an irrational purchase. But still, as you said, in our mind, it feels very rational.
It feels very necessary. I'm around so many Gausses, maybe 1 million Gausses. And so, of course, how am I going to have a watch for that? I'm just surrounded by Gauss.
It's everywhere.
But yes, yeah. But I think I do think that, and it's, especially, but also I think the impracticality of it is a signifier in and of itself for people just wearing a watch anyway. There used to be a real need for a watch. One of my favorite watches that I have is this really inexpensive Fremont, and it's a parking watch. Other people do them, but there's an alarm that has a 60, a 90, 120 minute with a little P. So, salesmen, I would imagine, can set their alarm and make sure they can run out and feed the meter, when they're going in for sales calls. I love the practicality of that.
So useful.
So useful. But now, so there was a use for all these things. But now, especially, with digital timekeeping and everyone with phones, there's really no need for a watch. There really isn't. And I think that anyone wearing a watch, and again, for me, the signifier isn't, oh, I've made it, I haven't, oh, I have resources, I don't have resources. I think anyone wearing a wristwatch, whatever it is, it's a signifier of, I appreciate timekeeping. I appreciate what it takes to make a watch, even if it's some digital Casio, or is it that 91W that collectors like, even if it's those digital Casios, it's a conscious choice and almost an iconoclastic choice to be like, you can have your cell phones, you can have all your digital type, but I'm going to wear a watch. And it's anachronistic and it's counterculture and it's I don't know. I mean, I'm talking about myself. It's like this punk rock thing of like, I'm going to wear a watch. I don't need to. So the whole idea of wearing a watch is unnecessary. And I think it's a signifier to other watch people that I really like.
So again, I totally agree with you, but I also like to be reductive and don't be upset about how unfancy I make the sound. But in a way, and I've thought about this, and again, it appeals to me.
Yeah.
Wearing a watch signifies I've achieved a point in my life where I can go outside wearing a toy and I can play with my toy. And my toy allows me to have my own little personal imagination about what I'm doing. And that's a little personal thing. But if you're also into wearing toys, then we have something in common. Thumbs up. Maybe you're pretty cool. But it's kind of like we're wearing toys.
I think you're right. I think you're right. And I think, again, regardless of price point, you are kind of playing that role. You know, I mean, you're James Bond, or you're a diver, or you're, whatever that thing is. I mean, for me, I started wearing watches because I started working at a very young age, and I was always the youngest person in the room. And I think that there was part of me that felt like a grown-up wearing a watch. Not a fancy watch. I wasn't wearing like, gold.
Makes you seem responsible.
It made me seem responsible. It made me feel grown up. So the toy, or like the part, that I was playing was, I was pretending to be a grown up. And I think that, I think you're right. I think when you put on a watch, it's a toy, and like any toy, it allows you to take on some different persona. And whether that's to be a grown-up, whether that's to be like our dad, whether that's to be, I'm a fancy businessman, even if you are, you're still kind of putting on the costume of a fancy businessman. And I think you're right.
As an actor, do you think that you play those roles better? Meaning by wearing different watches that remind you of different scenarios or characters, do you think you have special skills to, I guess, enjoy the watch hobby, maybe even more than others?
I wouldn't say that. I think we all come at it with and find an equal amount of love and enjoyment from our own experiences. But I do think that, and you see this more and more, and there's people who have brands committed almost exclusively to identifying watches, in film and television. But I do think that when you play a role, people, famously, gain weight or lose weight, or grow their hair out, or shave their head, or, the costuming of a role is really important. And you'll hear actors talk about when you put on the costume, you really kind of become the character. And I think a big part of that for me as an actor, and also as a director and a producer, is what's the watch? Like, that's such a part of the character. And whether someone is looking at the watches that actors or characters wear in movies and film and television or not, it's still a real signifier of character. And I think that's true, in the watches that you and I put on today when we leave the house. And it's certainly true when you're literally creating a character in entertainment. But I think to me, watches are a huge part of creating a character.
I remember, and I didn't realize this until quite recently, actually, but I remember that growing up in the 80s, I saw an awful lot of movies and shows where in some manner a watch was like, I wouldn't say like a character, but like had a crucial role as like a gadget or as a plot device or as just something that like there was always like larger than life watches, like watches that didn't really exist. Like they did things that, were like, they were props basically. And I think that seeing that time and time again created this idea that you could use your watch as a vehicle for imaginative, existence. And it was fun, and that you didn't have to use the functions. You could just imagine what it was like to use the functions, right? And
absolutely.
Not everyone grew up that way, but these days, and it's interesting by comparison, watches have a very different role in films. They're in there a lot, like as product placements. You don't have the fantasy watches as much that do, fake things that once in a while, like Interstellar, you get stuff like that. But It's amazing how sticky watches have been. And they're like almost even more prevalent in movies now. Like that's got to be good for watch culture, right?
I do think it's good for watch culture. I mean, you did touch on something that kind of spoils the romanticism a little bit, which is and I'm not saying you spoil the romanticism, but there is like so many things, a lot of product placement, you know what I mean? So I think when watches are really, shown, I'm sure there's deals being made and things like that. So it's not an accident.
But that doesn't ruin it for the consumer, Fred. The consumer doesn't care if it's paid or not.
No, it doesn't. But then you have other things that aren't paid that just happen. Carl F. Bucher and the John Wick watch, I'm sure if they knew that was going to get the attention that
was not organic.
Ending up in that film? No, but I'm saying
it was a deep relationship.
No, but I'm saying when that took off, it took off in like a really big way.
Well, yeah, they had no idea if it's going to be a popular film. That's the risk. Is this going to be a sucky film?
Right. And so, I mean, that watch was huge for CFB.
Yeah.
And so I think, you're right. A lot of stuff is placed, but then a lot of stuff is very subtle, and you find yourself going back, you go back and look at watches. So like, I'm a huge Jaws fan. So like that Alsta Nautiscaf, that Richard Dreyfuss wore, it's like, oh, I want to wear that. Or that really cool Ploprof that Ripley wore in Aliens. And there's all these, you go back, and the Vostok that Steve Zissou wore. I don't think that was a product placement by Vostok, but it was just, it worked for the character. It was
Some of them are organic. Some of them are.
But that made sense. Like, okay, this guy's a diver. He's kind of towards the end of his career. He's not going to have a sub. What's he going to have? And so it does lean into the storytelling of a character, which I think is really cool. So you're right. Whether it's product placement, or whether it's just something thoughtful or thoughtfully accidentally done, or that you look back pre-product placement and imbue all this meaning on. You look at these watches that the Captain Willard. You know what I mean? Like I'm a huge Apocalypse Now fan. I got that 6105, and I was like, this is badass. So I think there is a lot, and that all goes to what you were saying earlier about wearing a toy and the performance of that toy. It's like putting on a cowboy hat when you were a little kid, or a fireman's hat. We can still do that, but it's with watches.
So you took this journey and you decided to found a company, Timepiece Grading Specialists. What does the company do, and why did you found it?
So, as we were talking, I'm a secondary market guy. I don't buy a lot of watches on the primary market. I think I have, one or two I got from an AD. But, starting with those early, like I was saying, Elgin's and Illinois, the idea of a watch that had a history, that had some storytelling to it, really appealed to me. So I just became like a vintage pre-owned guy. And as I got more and more watches, it wasn't just vintage. It was just anything pre-owned. I really liked, that was the world I moved in. And I'd been collecting for a lot of years, and I bought a watch that I really loved. I bought this 1803, this white gold day date. And I showing all my friends, and I thought it was awesome, and bought it from a real, reputable place. And it was made clear to me and pointed out by my watch friends, like, oh, that's no good. I'm like, what are you talking about? It's like, oh, this has been redialed. And I didn't really even know what redialed meant, and they said, oh yeah, no, the serif on the X is wrong and the hash marks are no good. And I felt so dumb. I felt so kind of taken advantage of. It just felt terrible, but not as bad as the fact that none of my watch friends were shocked. No one was surprised. No one was like, this is awful. This is a travesty. Like, we have to write this. It was the opposite. Like, all my watch friends threw their arm around me and were like, you're one of us now. Like, welcome to the club. And I was like, all right, well, I guess it still kind of hurts, but okay, I guess that's what we do. That's what it means to be a watch collector, is to be kind of like I don't know, duped or taken advantage of.
All the time. We all go through it, Fred.
Yeah. Well, I learned that.
too.
And I was like, well, that doesn't feel very good at all. And I looked to my left and to my right at other collectibles, whether it's, baseball cards or coins or comic books or handbags or shoes or, certainly gems or even video games. All of those kind of collectible verticals have one, if not multiple, third-party authentication and condition grading services. But watches, for some reason, we're the only collectible group that has accepted the fact of, getting kind of snowed is part of it, is kind of the cost of entry. And that just didn't seem right to me. And so, I made it a point, to really start to get to know and meet and associate myself with, really top collectors and dealers. And they're out there. There's some wonderful dealers out there. And I was very fortunate to get to meet them and buy from those dealers. But not everybody knows an expert, or as I like to say, John Reardon can only sell so many paddocks. There's a lot of other people buying paddocks without the confidence of getting them from John. And so I had this thought in my head for a while of there's just got to be a better way to protect the consumer and the collector in the watch world. And a couple of years ago, there were these dual strikes in show business. There was a writer's strike and the actor's strike, and there was no work for almost 18 months. And so my wife said to me, she's like, this is not going to be like COVID where you sat around and just waited for someone to tell you when it was okay to go to work. She's like, go do something. Like, you drove me crazy, you drove yourself crazy, just figure something, be productive, during the strike time. So I was like, all right, well, I've had this idea in my head about a service, kind of like a GIA for watches or a PSA for watches. Let me see if that idea there's some life there, if that idea holds water. And so I spent almost a year, probably 8 or 9 months, going around the country meeting different watchmaking groups. I was in, Dallas and New York and San Francisco and Chicago and LA, obviously Kansas City, Miami, because I knew if we wanted to do this, we need the watches in hand. And I'm not a watchmaker, so I want to know people who can open them and examine them and look at them. And I ended up in Dayton, Ohio, and I met Ron and Emily Stahl, who have a service company called Stahl & Company, which is one of the biggest service centers in the United States. They have over 40 watchmakers. They service 15,000 watches a month. And they have an expert in nearly every luxury brand. And I said, well, if we're going to do this, this is the kind of knowledge base and group that I want to be a part of. And so I partnered with them, and we started Timepiece Grading Specialists. And the idea behind it is we want to give buyers of watches on the secondary market the same confidence that anyone who buys a vintage comic book or a vintage baseball card, the same confidence they have, knowing that the watch has been examined by a third party. We don't buy watches, we don't sell watches. We have no interest in the value of the watch. And they vouch for its originality. And if it isn't, they can identify what parts aren't. And we also wanted to standardize condition language. One man's scratch is another person's gouge. What does a daily wear mean? What is cuff polished? There's all these kind of terms that have come up that really don't necessarily mean
all
anything.
Manipulation.
Yeah, I mean, we wanted to standardize that, and so we kind of have two dueling philosophies. We want to democratize knowledge because there's a lot of great watch knowledge out there. There's even more terrible watch knowledge. And, my friend Mike Nouveau, when he wanted to start collecting watches, he said he spent a year researching 1675s before he finally bought one for himself. And there are people that want to do that, and they should. But if you're not as kind of esoteric and want to spend a year, drilling down on something, you should still be plugged into great knowledge. And so I want everyone to feel like they have an expert in their pocket. And when you have a watch graded by TGS, you have that expert alongside with you. And the other thing is I want to empower the collector. I want anyone who buys a watch on the secondary market to feel, the same confidence that I did when I bought my wife's engagement ring. And I don't know anything about stones, but I had, my GIA cert, and I sat across from someone who dealt diamonds for 40 years. And I could have a thoughtful conversation about occlusions and the ratio of the plane to the foot of the stone. And I felt empowered in that conversation. And I want to bring that same level of confidence and empowerment to anyone buying a watch on the secondary market.
Thank you for the explanation. What comes to mind as a good slogan is now everyone knows an expert, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of what we want. Like I said, I'm very fortunate that, given my time in the watch world and the people I've met, and the people I've been introduced to, I like you, have a phone full of, experts. And so, if I'm wondering about, should I buy this Hoyer, I can text Jeff Stein and say, hey, Jeff, what do you think? Like, that's very rare air, not a lot of people can do that. And so, I want people to feel like they do. They have a collector, they have an expert in their corner looking out for them.
What I think is worth mentioning about this service is the emphasis on neutrality. There are things like this that are very useful in the industry, nothing quite like TGS for short. But what's important here is, as you said, the person submitting the watch for the grading really just wants to get a expert opinion. They're not looking, you're not looking to buy it. You're not trying to make someone feel like it's more or less valuable than it is. You're just giving sort of a neutral assessment and appraisal, if you will. And then that empowers someone to get someone else to feel comfortable about the transaction and know what they're getting into. A lot of the people now who sell watches, they have an incentive to be shady. They want watches to seem better than they are. A lot of watches, especially used ones, are sold on the internet. And as anyone who's done this knows, a description or pictures can be angled or manipulated in a lot of ways to carefully leave out details or leave just enough room for error. It's not a pretty picture. And so to facilitate more sales, you of course can just make them feel safer. That can allow more watches to be bought and sold because you have standard practices allow people to be more comfortable. Forget the fact that novices now have an ability to do business, whereas you said they could take a lot longer before. But would you agree that those are crucial elements?
I think the impartiality of it is because every dealer vouches for their stuff. And, depending on what dealer you're talking to, that vouching is worth a lot or maybe sometimes, not so much. But the bigger thing is, we didn't need the marketplace doesn't need another dealer. I think, what the marketplace needs, or honestly, what I needed, I was trying to solve a problem that I had as a collector and as an enthusiast. I want to be 100% sure. And if the watch is good or not good, maybe there's something wrong with the watch that I'd be okay with. Maybe, for a certain watch, it's okay if it's got an aftermarket, it's got a service bezel, or maybe it's okay that the hands have been reloomed. But you want to know that, you want that to be disclosed. And I think you also touched on something that is really, for me, the most exciting part of this, which is we can lower the barrier for entry into the watch world. And if we do that, we can allow more watches to be transacted with more confidence and more transparency. And also, by making it less opaque, we can invite people in who are probably intimidated by the watch world. And, I get watches all the time. If we lower the barrier of entry into the secondary watch market, more watches will be transacted with more confidence. And I think that's everyone wins if we do that. People will pay more for the peace of mind. People can charge more for the sense of confidence. And if you invite more people into the watch world, you're going to have that many more people competing for what is, a finite number of watches. And I think, my hypothesis, and I've seen this before, I get calls all the time. I'm sure you do. I can only imagine the number you get of, hey, I want to get, an anniversary watch for my wife. I want to treat myself to my first I got my first promotion. I want to treat myself to a watch. Where do I go to get a watch? Where do I go? Who do I trust? And I think that, a lot of people's first experience with a luxury watch is on the secondary market. You're not going to walk into Rolex or AP or Patek and walk out with the watch that you want. So, a lot of people's, whether it's vintage or whether it's neo-vintage or whether it's just pre-owned modern, your first experience for a luxury watch is oftentimes going to be on the secondary market. And if we can make that an easier, more transparent, better experience, you can capture a watch person for life. Because I think a lot of people, they are going to buy that anniversary present or that 40th birthday present or 30th birthday present or graduation gift. They're going to get that gift. But because the secondary watch market is so opaque and so fraught, they're just going to go, they'll go buy a handbag or they'll go take a trip to Paris. It's not a very inviting marketplace. It's very fraught. And it's also, you can get, it's not like, oh, I'll lose a few $100. You could be losing, tens of thousands of dollars on a bad transaction.
High stakes.
It's high stakes. And if people get, have a bad experience, they're not going to say, oh, I blame, Bob, who sold me a bad watch. They're going to say, forget watches. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go do something else. And what's most exciting for me, as someone who just loves the community, is in success, I really think that we can grow the community and invite more people, in, who can become, lifetime, buyers and collectors.
So practically speaking, how can consumers or the market in general do business with or interact with Timepiece Grading Specialists? Explain to people where to even look for your information, how to use you. It's a new thing. The community sort of needs to be trained, if you will, on not only where to look for you, but how to use you. Give people who are listening that are intrigued a primer on exactly how to do business with you or benefit from your services.
You can find us on timepiecegrading.com. That's where we live. And we are, especially we just launched in February. So a lot of our early adopters are kind of the what do I have people. This is my grandparent, this is my grandfather's watch. I got this watch for a graduation present. What is it? What do I have? And so we do a lot of education, with our analysis, which has been really exciting for people and really fun for me. But then, we're also working with retailers who, are selling, who have a pre-owned watch section in their store. And it allows them to not only educate their own salespeople, but give the people buying the watch a peace of mind that it's been kind of vetted by a third party. We're working with online marketplaces. We're working with insurance companies. We're working with auction houses, who might not be in the watch business, but want to build a watch vertical. And so they're using kind of our expertise and our grading to help build out their watch department. So, right now we're building kind of those enterprise relationships, and people are seeing a watch here, a watch there, but hopefully, certainly by the end of the year, we're going to be out people will see us at retail outlets, at auction houses, and at places where they know and trust and see watch transactions, particularly pre-owned watch transactions being done, and kind of slowly build from there. But for right now, timepiecegrading.com is where you can find us. So
the report that you send people seems to include a written section that explains about the watch. That's interesting. Tell me more about that.
So when we take a watch in, it goes to our watchmakers, and we find who's kind of the expert in that brand. They'll open up the watch, they'll look inside, make sure everything's as it should be. If it's not, they note it. Then we bring the watch to each watch is graded by 3 different condition graders, and we have a rubric, a 1 to 10 rubric score for every component of the watch. So the lugs get a score, the hands get a score, the crystal gets a score, the movement, the originality, everything gets a score, and all those individual scores are put into a weighted formula. It's got to be weighted because a scratch on the crystal, for example, isn't as detrimental to the score of a watch as a scratch on the dial. And so it's a weighted formula, and we kind of value originality is the most heavily weighted of the scores. And through that weighted formula, we get one score for the watch. And then what we do is we photograph the watch, and we photograph it completely. And you were talking earlier, Ariel, about kind of beauty photography that people use to sell their watches. Our photography is, we'd like to think it's attractive photography, but it's much more forensic. We want you to see the watch for what it is. It's not beauty shots. It's not retouched. There's no photoshopping. We want you to see the watch for everything that it is. So, any watch, depending on the watch, the document has, 17 to 15 to 25 pages of photos. And each photo is annotated. So we identify everything from, okay, this is a Mark II bezel, and these are Mark III pushers, to every little scratch or ding or thing that's been replaced on the watch. And we just want everyone to know everything about that watch, as if, like you said, more and more watches are being done online, a lot of times sight unseen. And this really gives you a chance to see the watch as if you saw it in person. And so everything about the watch is annotated. We look at hallmarks, we educate people on what the hallmarks mean, where the serial numbers are, we date it, making sure the clasp codes are correct with that serial number range. Everything you'd want to know about the watch is all in this annotated document that we provide once we send the watch back. And what we do to kind of preserve our findings, we sticker the back of the watch with tamper-proof residue-free stickering to kind of preserve that moment in time that the end user can obviously take off and enjoy the watch. But we know that no one's gone inside and kind of tampered with the watch after we determine our findings. And with the watch comes a card. It's a watermarked card that has the watch's serial number, make, model, grade, and a QR code that links to this digital document. So whether you have the watch in front of you, you can scan the code, or you're buying it online, you can scan the QR code, and you can see everything about the watch and see if you feel comfortable getting it. But the documents is really what people have seen to really respond to. The level of transparency, of education, of information in those documents is not available anywhere else when you're buying a watch.
That's extremely comprehensive and a lot of work. What does that service cost people?
So we have a sliding scale based on the value of the watch. Our biggest fluctuating cost is the shipping and insurance of the watch. And so that's why
Sure.
kind of the value of the watch determines the price. So we have, it starts at $300 for a watch up to $10,000 and then goes up from there. But for that, when you sign up for our service, we want it to be, these are luxury watches, and these are watches that are important to our clients. And we recognize that and want this to be a luxury experience. So when you sign up for the service, we'll send you all the packaging instructions, all pre-addressed labels back to us. So we send you the packaging. You send it back to us. We send it back to you. So all the shipping is included in the price. All the research, all the photography, all the documentation, that's all included. And then when you get the watch back, you get it in a kind of a branded case that you can keep the watch in, that holds the card really nicely, and all that's included in the service. And so people have really found that whether it's a timeless heirloom, family heirloom, or maybe a watch they just got online and want to know a little bit more about, we treat them all with the value and no real recognizing how special they are to our clients. And people have really seemed to respond to it. They really love how comprehensive it is. And it's a very, white glove experience that we pride ourselves on.
That's a lot of infrastructure you've had to build and processes, the software and things like that, the grading scale. Just out of curiosity, what was your own role in all that? Obviously, maybe it wasn't alone. It sounds like a multiple person team. Obviously, the Stolls, who are amazing and their facility is great, contribute a lot. But I'm just curious for you, what were some of your own major contributions to this complicated machine that you built?
It's a big team, but it's a small team. Partnering with the Stalls has been just instrumental. And I certainly could not have done this without their support, their expertise, their knowledge base, their passion, and frankly, their reputation. I mean, they are there's no one like their operation in the country. Whether you know them by name or not, there's a high likelihood that at one point your watch has or will pass through that facility in Dayton, Ohio. And so it was me and them. This is my first endeavor as a entrepreneur. It's the first company we built from the ground up. And it's been a real labor of love. It's been a lot of trial and error. As I was mentioning, it took about two and a half years to get to where we are before we launched. And, everything, all the systems, there were a lot of mistakes made along the way, but all the systems, the rubric, the packaging, kind of the back of the house stuff was all done, by us, by me, by the team. And so it's been a real passion project. We said that earlier, like taking a passion and trying to make an enterprise out of it is something that a lot of watch enthusiasts have done or tried to do. And so it has been a tremendous amount of work. I'm living in Dayton, Ohio right now. Like I'm there every day. My family's in Los Angeles, so we're all in. But if it's something you're passionate about, I know it sounds so corny. I hate it even before I said it, but it doesn't feel like work. It really, every time a watch comes in, it's so exciting. Every time we have to photograph it, anyone who's ever photographed a watch knows just how hard it is. I mean, how reflective the surfaces are and the cases are, and the dials are. It's brutal, but you're photographing these beautiful things. And it's a real passion, and it has been a tremendous effort, but it doesn't feel arduous, I guess. It feels really exciting.
Well, I think a congratulations is in order simply for seeing your vision fully executed. You had this idea, building it. I mean, look, you've been on the receiving end of probably tens of thousands of ideas, right? You know how rarely they actually get done, that you went about and not only made these sacrifices and major changes to your life, but that you saw it through. In this space, that's hard to do because there's always pitfalls, and I'm sure you've seen many of them, hurdles that you need to overcome that you didn't anticipate. So on a basic level, I just think it's fantastic that you, again, I consider it a machine. You designed a machine to build the machine, to test the machine, to make sure the machine operates. That in itself is a huge deal. So congrats. Yeah,
thank you. And it's been incredibly rewarding to see how well it's been received by the watch community. I think that there are a lot of people who see the value of this. There's been a lot of like, I can't believe this doesn't exist. This is going to be amazing. And so everyone from kind of the novice to, really hardcore, passionate watch people who really know their stuff, I think they see the value to not just the community, but to the potential community that we represent, and are very invested in our success. We put together a really terrific board of advisors that I'm really proud of. But beyond that, there's just a tremendous amount of people with deep knowledge and expertise who have offered themselves to us. If you have any questions, how can we be helpful? How can we allow you to be successful? Who can we introduce you to? How can we expose you? Because I think that in success, a lot of people see how we can benefit the entire community. And so that has been incredibly gratifying. And also, people outside the watch community are getting excited about it. So I was just in Chicago last weekend at the National, which is a huge kind of the biggest card convention, trading card convention in the country. And I was there and I was meeting with a lot of big companies who are very invested in sports cards, sports memorabilia, and, grading is so essential to that community, whether it's grading, photo matching, everything that's bought and traded on in those markets have gone through one of these authentication services. And they have a really passionate collector base, but they don't know how to get into watches. They know that watches is a great market. They know it's got a really passionate, enthusiastic base, but they've never gotten into it because everything that they're in has these grading services. And so the fact that just by us existing is allowing these really big enterprises that exist in other collectible verticals to come into watches. And again, I just think that is going to help grow the community and build value for people who are already in the community. So it's been very exciting to see how well we've been received, both within and without the community. It's been great.
As I've said to you multiple times, I'll repeat it. I'm delighted that at least someone did this, even better that you did this. This is a necessary thing. You know that I'm always looking at the industry in general and I want to be healthy. And I guess in the remaining minutes, I'll ask this last question. You now are not just a fan of watches, you are decidedly in the industry. You're in the watch business. So you want what's best for the watch industry. You want people to buy watches and sell watches, and especially in the United States, and as much volume as possible. But we are faced with a lot of hurdles right now, and not just geopolitics, but a lot of brands that really need to sort of step up their marketing game. So I guess in the remaining minutes, speak to the industry. Tell them what you think is going to be happening in your market over the next few years, but also give them some advice. What can they be doing differently, especially to weather the storm or best appeal to American consumers, given the context of our era? I know it's a big topic, but I think you can manage it.
It is. Well, thank you. That's a vote of confidence. What I will say, I wanted to just touch on something you said at the kind of the beginning of that question. Which is, and I'm glad you said that people might be happy that I'm doing this. I'm coming at this as someone who loves watches. And I think that there are people who build brands, build their personal brand kind of on kind of shitting on watches. Oh, this watch is no good. This guy's a crook. That guy's an idiot. This is garbage. And I think that there's a lot of kind of exposing. And while I think that there is a place for that, and I think there is a value to that, I think what that ultimately does is it just terrifies people and scares them away, saying, "Oh my God, this is so fraught with, there's vipers everywhere. This is awful." What I say about those kinds of watch examinations is, I just wish they have tremendous knowledge, they have tremendous database of information. And I just wish they'd use their powers for good, rather than evil. And so what we want to try and do is,
blame the algorithm.
Well, I know, maybe. But I want to take this knowledge base and, let people know that the water is warm. Like, you can come, you can buy watches, you can transact them with tremendous confidence. And when we create these documents, it's not to expose a watch, because I really believe that there's a buyer for every watch. You just should know what you're getting. And, there's a lot of, really terrific dealers who would never touch a watch that's been polished or has had parts replaced or has been reloomed, redialed. But there are buyers out there who that's what they can afford, and they're okay with that. And they should get the watch that they want. They should just know that they should be paying the all original price, for example. So we want to kind of let people know exactly what kind of a watch is. We want to promote every watch we get. We want to promote it as well as we can, and let people know exactly what they're getting, which we've been really successful at, and people really do appreciate that. So then to the second kind of part of your question, I think, you're mentioning geopolitics. I'm no economist, but I do think that with all this turmoil going on with taxes and tariffs and supply chain issues, I think every time I read about that, it points to the secondary market. You can, there's incredible watches, here in the States that you can get, and that you can get at a discount, and you don't
no
have to
tariffs on a used watch.
No tariffs on a used watch. And so all of these things, for me, it really points to the secondary market. And for the primary market, I think now more than ever, I think that brands are being aware of and understanding the importance of the secondary market to the primary market. And you see that everywhere from, Rolex launching their CPO program because, they realize that even if you're getting a pre-owned watch from a really respected dealer or jewelry store, having that CPO stamp is really important. And they want to be aware of the stuff that's on the secondary market that says Rolex. And so whether there's CPO programs and other brands are kind of getting in on the CPO, their own CPO programs, to brands understanding that they want to maybe limit production so they can justify a higher, retail price. Because, we're all savvy, shoppers, try to be sometimes we're less savvy, but we want to be savvy shoppers, and we can see if there's a watch on the primary market for, X amount of dollars, but you could get that watch that's 2 or 3 years old on the secondary market for a third of X, a half of X or less. Brands notice that. And so I think that being aware of the secondary market, I think is prompting brands to consider the value prop to the consumer for buying their watch on the primary market. And all of these things just benefit us, benefit the consumer, benefit the collector. So I think that unless you're going to lose out constantly to the secondary market, those brands really need to be aware of the value proposition that buying primary offers to the consumer. And sometimes it's just having the newest, sexiest, coolest thing. I mean, that's never not going to be attractive to a certain buyer. But beyond that, I think you just have to offer, a better value proposition. And I think they're starting to do that, which as a collector and a consumer and an enthusiast is very exciting.
Very sage advice from Fred Savage. No, that's fantastic. I'm impressed by the insight. I think other people are accustomed to people gravitating towards this hobby, but you've really approached it from an intellectual component and perspective that you want to understand as much as you can about it. That's fantastic. You're the type of person that I want running a business that grades timepieces. And, yes, you have celebrity, but I think that what's important is that it goes so much beyond that. And that's what I hope people get out of this conversation. We're out of time. I want to direct people to the website timepiecegrading.com. Fred, I want to say thank you so much for being on the show. We'll obviously have to talk a little bit more in a couple of months when the business is up and running even more. You have more volume. You will have learned more things, and I'm curious about it. Thank you so much, Fred.
It's a pleasure. And when we get to that point, Ariel, I would love to have you come to Dayton. Come check out the operation.
The best press trip ever.
I can take you to a great dinner. I think I could show you one great night in Dayton. But honestly, I would love you to come see what we're doing, and it'd be our pleasure to have you take a look because and so your support and your enthusiasm and your attention to what we're doing is incredibly meaningful and very, very gratifying. So thank you.
This has been the Superlative Podcast interview with Timepiece Grading Specialist founder Fred Savage. Fred, thank you so much.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.